The historical origins of the approach and how it applies to real life. Sociocultural psychology came about from people wanting to learn more about nature versus nurture and the psychological effects of authority and surroundings. The findings revealed that nurture has a bigger effect than nature does. And we are going to discuss how surroundings and peer pressure influence decision making.
An experiment made famous in sociocultural psychology was the Milgram experiment. This was performed by Stanley Milgram in 1963. This was a very controversial experiment. It was used to examine the justifications used for men on trial for war crimes in the Nuremberg trials. This experiment was used to test obedience to authority versus personal conscience. Essentially, the question was to see whether everyone involved in the war would be responsible for the genocide, and if the suspects were guilty of war crimes for being obedient to authority, despite pleading that it was against their morals. The experiment consisted of volunteers to be teachers, learners, and experimenters. There was a Confederate experimenter, Milgram. The learners were strapped into a chair with electrodes attached to them and asked questions. When answered wrong, the learners were shocked by the teachers, who were ordered to do so by the experimenters. The test was done 18 times and showed how obedience to authority caused the teachers to inflict fatal shocks to the learners despite them thinking it was wrong. People were also more inclined to believe that whatever happened to the patient, the authority would be held responsible. Potential fatalities were part of why the experiment was so controversial and effective. Another experiment that is very well known in social psychology is the Stanford Prison Experiment. This was performed by Philip Zimbardo in the basement of the Stanford Psychology Department. The experiment consisted of creating a fake prison and getting volunteers to play prisoners and guards for 2 weeks. However, the experiment only lasted 6 days because of the abuse and cruel effects of the experiment. Shortly after the experiment began, the guards and prisoners became caught up in their roles. This led to the guards brutally beating the prisoners and prisoners becoming malnourished. The effects were so psychologically damaging that the experiment had to end over a week before planned. This experiment proved how much authority can change a person's actions and how easily people can be influenced.
The goal of the approach. Sociocultural takes an approach that focuses on people's surroundings and how they are influenced by their society. Instead of relying on biological factors alone, this approach demonstrates a better understanding of how we acquire abilities and behaviors. For example, a biological factor would be a parent being an alcoholic and thinking that if their kid were to become an alcoholic, it would be because of the parents. But the actual cause of it would be that the kid hung out with friends who drank a lot, and the kid received the bad habits from that exposure. Who a person decides to surround themselves with, or what experiences that they've been exposed to, can be a huge factor in a person's psychology. The overall goal is to not judge off genetics, but to discover or help with the psychological problems through personal experiences. This photo represents a girl being negatively influenced by a group of people.
There are many important concepts involving sociocultural psychology. The main ideas of this is to get to know the patient's society they grew up in. Because though we do not always realize, the culture we live in greatly affects the development of our brain. Our parents, relatives, and peers all have important roles in the way we act and how the brain develops. Tools of intellectual adaptation is a term that Vygotsky, a psychologist, uses to describe the tools that allows children to use their basic mental abilities in a way that is adaptive to the culture they live in.
Important psychologists. Stanley Milgram is one of the most important psychologists linked to sociocultural psychology. Milgram believed that people will obey an order to deliver a possibly deadly electric shock to another person. He oversaw other tests that are also related to obedience, including the lost letter technique, Cyranoid technique, and small world technique. Another important psychologist is Maximilian Ringelmann. Ringelmann conducted some of the first experiments in social psychology. One example of an experiment is where he found that the larger a group of people, the less productive they are, and this was known as the Ringelmann effect. Some other notable psychologists related to sociocultural psychology are Leonard Dubé, Gordon Allport, and Kenneth Clark.
Are you doing homework, loser?
Yeah, I gotta get this done.
Have you heard about the party tonight? It's gonna be mad crazy.
Yeah, but I don't think I want to go.
Yes, you do. It's gonna be so fun. There's gonna be drinking. There's gonna be drugs. We're gonna smoke. It's gonna be crazy.
Yeah, but whenever I go, I never want to do those things, but I always feel like I get pressured to do them.
Loser. It will be so fun. You have to go. Get off your iPad for once.
Okay, fine, I'll go.
So why don't you just meet me in the middle?
Mackenzie, I haven't seen you in a few weeks. How have you been?
Well, actually, I wanted to come in to talk to you because I feel like I've been drinking a lot of alcohol lately, and I feel like, in a way, like, it's kind of become, like, reliant.
Right.
And I'm scared that it's because my mom was an alcoholic, but she, like, got clean before I was born, but I just feel like that it could influence me to also be an alcoholic.
Right. Do you think your friends ever pressure you? Do you feel expected to drink and do drugs when you're at these parties?
Yeah, because I never usually want to go, but then I always end up going.
I think the problem isn't your mom because she was clean before you were born. I think the problem is more the environment that you're in and the people that you choose to spend your time with. So if you feel like you're pressured to do drugs and do bad things when you're with your friends, I think that's a direct correlation of the people that you're trying to become friends with in general.
Yeah, I definitely think you're right because my mom is a really positive influence on me, and I think the girls I surround myself with definitely affect me negatively, so I think I'm going to surround myself with better people.
That's a good decision, Mackenzie.